Hey, so welcome everybody to TransTech London's first virtual meet of the year. I hope you're doing well. It's been a crazy year, very, very challenging. My name is Neeraj Shah and just wanted to welcome you here. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about TransTech and just giving you an intro to what the community is. And then we'll get into a conversation with Anna all about raising capital during a pandemic and has become the CEO of a TransTech startup. And I'm sure we'll go into lots of nuggets there. And on top of that, we will also explore quite a bit, have plenty of time for Q&A and so on. And there'll be if you've got questions that come up during the webinar, then do during the meeting, I want to say, because I'm trying to think of it as we're meeting as if we would in real life, which I'm sure we will soon at some point, I hope at least. But if you have any questions, just hold on to them and there will be a Q&A section at the end. So, transformative technology. We have this fundamental belief that the future of work, society, and technology depends on the state of the human mind. And this is the fundamental question we ask: how do we enable every human to develop the cognitive and emotional ability to express their full potential? Because at the moment, that's not a democratized thing. It's based on where you grew up and who your parents are and what school you go to and what sort of people you're exposed to and what kind of workplace you might go to. It's definitely not a democratic thing. But the beautiful thing today is that although technology has disrupted the world in a way that's caused a lot of problems to do with attention and comparison culture and those sort of things, it also is a key part of the solution because it makes everything accessible and distributable and to an extent affordable. And when we look at transformative technologies, what we're looking at is technologies that support mental health, emotional well-being, and human thriving. So that's everything from these are the areas. So everything from, there's so many advances happening in the AI side of it, neurofeedback. So these would be through wearables and through things that measure our nervous system, all the way through to neurostimulation, which is something we're going to talk about today with Sensate and what they're doing in that space and so on. But there's a range of converging areas that really make up this thing. And transformative technology, we've created this ecosystem, this global ecosystem that's really dedicated to developing those technologies. So that's everything from our annual conference, which just happened last month, through to local meets and when we're allowed to meet together and it's sensible to meet in person, we'll do all of that again, through to our academy, which helps TransTech startups to progress with their business. And I know many of you have been through that process or you're aware of that. And we've got a global footprint, members in 70 countries, 450 cities. And the exciting thing is that these are not just in typical places like San Francisco or London or Paris or all of these tech hubs, but actually we've got lots of presence in South America and Africa and Southeast Asia, because we fundamentally believe that a lot of these problems are quite, around mental health, emotional well-being, and so on. They're quite localized, and the solutions are going to be local solutions rather than Silicon Valley deciding what the solution is for everybody. So that's quite exciting. I think I've mentioned most of this, but yeah, so these are the places where you can find out more about transformative technology, and we'll send all of this out in a follow-up email as well as details of Sensate, who we're going to talk about a lot today with the CEO, Anna. And you can find out everything at this website, transformativetech.org. My name is Neeraj. I am the co-chair for Europe for Transformative Technology, which means I get to co-oversee the whole European community development. It's a really privileged position because it means I get to talk to so many of you folks, see so many of the startups in this space. This is my email address if you want to get in touch about anything. And the company that I run is called Mind Unlocked, which really looks at mental performance and mental well-being for entrepreneurs and executives. I'm now 9 years into my first business, which was in a different sector, 5 years since I started my first technology company, and Mind Unlocked is a couple of years old, so very much in the early stages. And I've been coaching and mentoring other entrepreneurs for about 6 years as well, and investing in various things for the last 21 or so. So I'm really keen for us to get into the main conversation, and that's with Anna Gudmundson, who is the CEO of Sensate and its parent company, BioSelf Technology. So I'm just going to figure out how I can invite her in to turn her video on. Here we go. And then I will stop my screen share. Hello. Hi, Anna. Welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Very good. Very good. Busy week, but it's a startup life.
It is indeed. So let's start from the start. If you could tell us a bit more about what Sensate is and where you guys are in your journey so far, that will set the scene, and then we can get into the fundraising and how you became the CEO and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I start with the product. This Sensate is an amazing product that helps you relax in as little as 10 minutes. You put the product on your sternum. It uses near infrasonics and bone conduction to help tone the vagus nerve. And as I'm sure some of our listeners will know, a good vagal nerve tone is a very, very important aspect of well-being and stress resilience. And so Stefan Schmeling, my co-founder, who has been working in this field for decades and been using this therapy in his clinic successfully, and healed, his clinics, they healed thousands of people with quite severe stress and trauma problems and sort of related disease. And so the Sensate itself came out of him really wanting this type of therapy to reach a much wider audience. And it's been, so in terms of where we're at, it's been several years in product development to make sure that we are getting the same result out of this portable device as the sort of previous bigger kit that uses this type of therapy. And yeah, so the first version of the product came out last year, and that was only 1,000 devices to kind of test and validate, also market, and that was overwhelmingly positive, and incredible feedback from those early users. So we now have the second version, which I showed, which has both improved therapeutic element, because it is a therapeutic device. It's not a tracking device, it's a therapeutic device, has been improved, and a number of other things with the form factor and so on. And yeah, it's now available online, and we've shipped and starting to get a lot of amazing feedback also from all the new users.
Great. So I just want to backtrack slightly, because I know this story a little bit because I've known Stefan for a while as well. I mean, I think he got in touch around the time when the first Sensate when he first had the thing in his hand. And so Stefan runs a clinic in central London, and as you've rightly said, he wanted to take this kind of therapy that he'd been doing and make it much more accessible and create a device that anyone around the world could use and so on. And so it was from his clinical work that this all came out in terms of the concept and the idea. How did you get involved in that? What was the journey on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was working in the wearable space at the time. So my background is solid technology. Worked in technology management roles for over 15 years. And I was working at the time actually doing a very quite complex sell of a company. So we were selling a company that had both wearables and services. And I was a turnaround CEO for that company. And so it's reasonably small world, and there were actually a few people that told Stefan that he should get in touch with me, which he did, and we got introduced for a few different people. So I initially joined as an advisor and helped Stefan a bit with strategy and things, and then I did some consulting, and then I took a board director role, and then I raised the majority of the funding and took the co-founder and CEO role as part of that. So we really had the time to get to know each other, and yeah, it took a while until I wasn't planning on doing startup at the time, but I am passionate about I mean, I've been working in technology for a couple of decades, and I really have made a decision some years ago that I want to work with the technology that's doing something good. I am incredibly passionate about human evolution and human performance, but in like a healthy way, right? And I think I kind of walk the walk. I've done a lot of work on myself just because, you know, I think we all have more potential. So so I have a huge interest in the field, and yeah, so the other aspect is I'm really passionate about great business, and you know, there are two sides of it. Both, I was blown away by the feedback, having also been CPO and VP product and worked with those kind of parts of the business. It's like gold dust to get spontaneous reviews. So just the amount of spontaneous reviews was really fascinating to me. But then also just unit economics and you know, solving a great problem with a commercially viable business. So yeah, here I am.
So I just want to dig into this a little bit, because something that we find quite common in a lot of conversations I've had is that when somebody starts a company and when they found it, often they want to be the CEO and often they should be the CEO, but sometimes it might not be the best thing for the company. How did that dynamic work for you guys in terms of figuring this out? And I'm guessing you've probably had this kind of conversation with other people in the past where it hasn't ended up in a change of leadership. So especially with, you know, a relatively early stage startup. So I'd love to explore your thoughts on how that worked, and maybe what two things, filters I'd like to look at. One is what kind of questions a founder should be asking to figure this out. And secondly, what sort of thought processes somebody who maybe starts as a consultant or an employee or something, but yes, basically not the founder, should be thinking about if they want to navigate to a leadership role within a startup?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this is an interesting conversation. I do think that some of the networks and sort of startup mingling, almost like matchmaking, both, well, it used to be a face-to-face event, but we start to really consider what type of co-founders you should have, and that definitely in the Bay Area as well it becomes really quite important. So I think that you know, it's also part of the human consciousness is to be aware of your ego, right? So sometimes, you know, just because the CEO has some kind of status to the role, you should do what you're passionate about and what you're good at. I mean, Stefan's a leader in integrated health and has been for decades. He's an absolute genius for having innovated this product. You know, could never ever reach his level of skills, and also he's just genuinely talented, and I think also one of the reasons I love working with him is that he's not a career professional. Like, this is a calling for him, and he's always, you know, this is like feels completely purpose driven, right? And so he needed someone with complementary experience. So, you know, how to build and run a tech company, global go-to-market strategy, fundraising, operations, hiring. And I'm passionate about that. And I'm passionate about working with him and the team, and also just, I guess, my leadership style is not very hierarchical, right? We just have different skills, and as everyone in the team, we just fill different purposes in the team. So I think it's important to you know, to consider what it is that you're good at, and you know, definitely, and how that kind of founding team should look like, and find complementary skills. I think it's sad if you are extremely good technically and not particularly good at marketing strategy, that you end up doing marketing strategy and fundraising and no one's looking after technology and so on. So yeah, and that's worked so well with Stefan and I. We've got very different skill sets and totally respect and admire each other's skills. So it's a good match.
And how do you, we can talk about you specifically, or we can talk in more general terms, depending on what's most useful. But in terms of decision making and operating agreements and those kind of things, because it's always tricky for co-founders to figure this out. And I get that it's going to be a different flavor for everyone. But what are some of the things that you've learned that would serve people well to understand at the outset that this is, how you would work with a newer co-founder or in terms of top level decision making?
So sorry, what was the question? Because you were breaking up a little bit for me just when you started the question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just curious about decision making and operating agreements and those kind of things. So of course, again, now you're the CEO, so of course you're making the decisions. But if somebody's in a co-founding arrangement, especially with one person started the thing, another one's come in to help grow it, then is there anything you've learned that could be useful for people to hear about decision-making structures, or what can work well and what? And I'm asking you that with two lenses because I know you've consulted a lot of businesses as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's good. So I'm actually quite interested and fascinated by teal organizations, which is a sort of non-hierarchical type of organization and a lot of self-management. And personally, I like to empower the team. And so if there's a decision to be made, someone will own it. And then it's up to that person to make sure that people who need to be part of the decision making are being part of that conversation, and that people that need to be informed are being informed. So when you get the team to work that way, I haven't seen anything that is more effective, to be honest. But having said this, just for us, there are definitely areas of responsibility. So it's reasonably clear who looks after manufacturing, who looks after marketing or agency agreements, but then we all help each other. Like, it's a small team, it's natural to, and even like if there's someone who has the role was actually really good at reading agreements, so we're a very collaborative team. And I think that in terms of risk mitigation, collaboration, communication, all of those things outperforms a lot of structure. So yeah, when it comes to consulting, it's always harder. And also for anyone who's worked in product, when you actually have a lot of responsibility, but not necessarily the accountability to make the decisions, it's even more important to be able to sell in your idea, to get buy-in from stakeholders, and so on. And when I've consulted, I've always been very honest and I think and straight and clear. And then sometimes that's the way you want the decisions to be made, and sometimes it goes a different way. But for me, integrity is extremely important, and I know that every sort of client I worked with as a consultant, I would have given them the absolute best advice I possibly could. So yeah, I think it's a communication, collaboration, I think are absolutely the top things to get the right decisions made.
How are you managing communication at the moment? Because I know you guys are spread out a bit anyway, but especially at the moment, nobody's able to work together in one office, or it's very rare. What are you doing from like a tools or structures point of view just to keep the communication good without being overwhelming?
Yeah. So a lot of tools, automation, Slack, and all hands. So collaborating, we're totally in the Google suite. So co-working on documents, also transparency. Everyone's got visibility to each other's calendars, and so yeah, transparency. We use also project management tools. We use Miro and Trello, and it depends a little bit like what Jira if it's for software development and so on. So at the moment it's working quite well, and it's it's also about when it's early stage and fast growing, you need to redefine how you work every 3 months. as soon as, and processes are helpful, right? I keep saying, like, discipline provide freedom. The more you have clear processes and actually discipline to follow them, the more freedom you have to excel in your area. So at the moment, that's working pretty well, and we and we're actually pretty remote already. So we had a couple of hubs. We have people in the US and in the UK, and now we're fully remote. But it's working really well. And sometimes even just like actually work together over Zoom, and you're silent most of the time, but you're sitting working in a document together, and then you chat a little bit. So we've managed okay, and we're constantly working at it. Constantly, how can we do this better? How do we onboard people better? It's work in progress.
Okay, cool. So I just want to recap, and then let's get into the fundraising side on the next question. But you mentioned a few things there. So Slack for communication, Google Suite for collaboration on documents. You said all hands. How does all hands work for you guys remotely?
Yeah, so we schedule our all hands meetings typically in the afternoon. So we cover both time zones. And then they're quite typical, so it will be a little bit more of a deep dive, and they're very, even our contractors tend to join them. So it's about like for everyone to really know what's going on in the business. And for me, that has always been part of my philosophy. I think that everyone works better. I share a lot of the sort of top level strategies, and I always have. I think it's motivating, but it also helps people to make decisions, because they don't just know what they need to do. They know why they're doing it and how it fits into the bigger picture. But then, try to make sure that the all hands is like different people in the team that are sharing what's going on in their areas, and deep diving questions and some strategic updates and all of that. But yeah, we do them on Zoom.
Cool. And you mentioned Trello as well. Trello has been huge for me, both personally and business-wise, to the point that even on Mine Unlocked, we were using it right from the point there was only 2 of us, because when it comes to task management and just clarity of what needs to be done and what's in progress and what's actually finished, I just found that system was really, really good as well.
Yeah, there are more sophisticated project management tools, but it's just like sometimes the simplicity of the UI of Trello makes everyone use it, and the best tool is the one that people use. So for us, it's working really well right now. Yeah.
And it was about finding that balance between what's necessary to collaborate versus what's so overwhelming that it becomes painful to use and update and so on. So I think everybody needs to find a balance, but I think that's where Trello has been really effective for so many people because of its simplicity. And I think you're right, there are more complicated project management systems, but I think that those become a lot more relevant when you've got bigger teams working, where you've got more moving parts. But certainly in my experience, when it's a handful of people, then something like Trello works very, very well.
Yeah, and in larger organizations as well, I've found that there's never one tool that works for everyone. Marketing will want to use a certain tool, and obviously the whole Confluence and Jira and that whole suite for software development, and that's okay. So once the team grows, I think you start to have different tools being used in different areas as well.
Cool, good. So let's talk about fundraising. So first of all, congratulations on your fundraising. I know there's been some really big wins in the last few months. Just tell us a bit more about the fundraising journey, pretty much from the start, so we can build a picture of what's happened and where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. So we started fundraise just before the pandemic. And so we were raising primarily with UK angels and funds, and UK and European to start with. So we had traction with some really amazing, passionate angels, but we didn't have any success with any UK or European funds. So it was both.
One sec. Just so everybody's got the full story, the original device. Can you just give us a top level of how that was funded, whether that was initially a private thing, whether it was crowdfunding, and then where it went from there?
Yeah, so Angel, Stefan has obviously worked on it, funded part of it himself early on. And then Angel Investors was the very, very early stage.
Yeah, okay, great. And then, so you've got these first 1,000 devices and got some traction in the market, got some users, got some user feedback, and I think improved the device. And that probably brought us to the more or less the start of this year, right?
Yeah, exactly. We were working on the new device beginning of this year, and I went out to the US. Actually, I was there end of last year. And so there were two reasons. One, which is that the US is a really important market for us. I could see the potential. So again, sort of analysis and research that I did beforehand. And so it would be very relevant for us to have a good strategic investor in the US. So I was keen on that. But then, as it happened, just had so much more traction in the US, and ended up, and I wouldn't say that that's necessarily normal, because it can be quite hard for a UK company to raise money in the US. But for us, we had a lot more traction with US investors than we had with the UK-based and European funds. And so, yeah, we got 3 institutional investors in the US. They're absolutely amazing. So Expert Dojo, 10110, and Unlock. But yeah, I mean, this pandemic hit just as I was initiating conversations in the US, and actually initially also with there's a lot of quite strong angel networks and angel groups as well in the US. So yeah, it was not a linear, straightforward journey. There were, both sides of the pond, and then we had the pandemic, and so changing strategy, and I got stuck in California for some time. So yeah, it wasn't that straightforward, but super excited about the investors that we have, both the early angel investors that are amazing and super passionate and really like advocate users and love and understand the product. This is fantastic. And then the institutions that we have involved are lovely. They're so passionate about helping us, and I think that's really key on the fundraising journey, because they are so supportive for for you to find the next fund and be part of that journey.
What did you find you had to do differently once a pandemic hit? Like, how did that change the dynamic of fundraising? Yeah,
so angel funding just disappeared. I had a whole bunch of leads on the go, and what happened with the market consequence of the pandemic was that, because angel money is personal, so it's a lot more emotional. You're not forced to invest, you invest because you want to, and it's a personal loss, and it just disappeared. So that was one part, which like pretty much all the leads I was working on just went away. The other aspect was to also do all the meetings remotely, and I really like to connect with people. So for me, that was I had to change the format, so a little bit less just conversational and actually a little bit more structured, and it took me a bit to understand that. And then, to get to know people online. So all, they are also used to they invest hundreds of thousands into a company. They want to meet the people. And here we have to really build, so how do you build relationship, build trust? And that is not just over the Zoom meetings, it's the whole thing. So how you respond to, how quickly you respond to, how you communicate, through email, how you communicate via all the channels, and how that whole process works. And yeah, it's time consuming, and I wouldn't give myself a 10 out of 10, but I really did my best to communicate really well. And but yeah, it was quite a big shift, and unknown. But yeah, I mean, now there's one of our key investors I've never met in person, but I feel like I know them really well. I've spoken to them. So, I mean, it feels strange to say I've never met them in person, because like I really feel like they're part of our family, the Sensate family, and yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the power of technology today, which is that it allows us to connect in these ways. But as you've rightly pointed out, it's a slightly different dynamic, and it takes
In my opinion, I don't know if it takes more effort, but it takes a different type of effort rather than, you don't get that bonding when you can sit down in the same room with somebody and spend an hour or two going over things. So that's really interesting. So I'm really keen to move into questions, but not just yet, because there's a couple of other things still to talk about. We've got a question from John Muolo, which I think fits in really well here, which he said, sorry if I missed this, but where were you on revenue or other traction prior to going to US funders? I think that's a really important question for non-US companies. So if you could give us a bit of light on, what, I think what the question is, what in the confidence that it was the right time, and at what stage had you got to go to US?
Yeah. We had revenue from the first 1,000 devices that we had sold, and then we didn't have any more devices. So we had no monthly revenue, but we had revenues from the previous production and the previous year. There isn't a sort of, you have to have revenue or not to go fundraise with US investors. It completely depends. If you're biotech, you're not going to have revenue for years. It completely depends on what type of business it is, right? But I do feel like the future vision and the growth potential and just being able to express what that looks like and how you're going to get there is more that was something that was very strongly received, very well received in the US, whereas I kind of don't like to iterate. It's not really fact-based, but sometimes I do feel like European and UK funds can be a bit more risk-averse, for good and for bad. And so more looking at the evidence that you have near term. And that makes it different if you're in a completely new industry and you're pioneering and you don't have as much sort of, it's not the Uber of name it, right? So I don't think that you need to have necessarily a certain amount of revenue to go to the US, but there is only a small percentage of pre-seed funds that will invest in UK vehicles. So that's important to understand from a fundraise strategy and to get that cleared very early on, because it's only, I think it's, maybe 10-15% of funds that will pre-seed funds that will invest in international or UK companies out of the US ones.
Great point. Something else, you and I have spoken about this before. Whilst it's not, what I'm hearing is it's not important to have a lot of revenue or necessarily even a lot of traction. What are your views on some sort of validation before you start going out looking for external money?
Yeah, I think what's absolutely critical is to know what it takes for the business to be successful and how you're going to get there. And I mean, as a consultant, I've been approached as well by earlier stage companies that have investment and want me to help them scale that up. And it surprises me sometimes that people haven't looked at what would it take for this company to achieve X. And if it's a SaaS, basics to have lifetime value over cost per acquisition, do some testing on the market sizing, appetite, wanting to pay for, whatever the service or product is. So that I think is absolutely crucial. Like you should want to know for yourself what it takes. And then also for a startup founder or startup CEO, knowing that will completely determine your strategy and your funding strategy. So if you, for example, have a product that could sell into healthcare, or you can go direct to consumer. If you go direct to consumer, you might be able to start having small revenue and scale and have some evidence. You go into healthcare, you're probably going to have lots more regulation and testing, clinical testing. So massive funding needs, and also much longer time to revenue. And so those are so strategically different to understand and determine that. Obviously you can pivot, that's always a possibility, but at least upfront as a, you know, as a founder to understand that those, well, that might,
Yeah.
or economics.
Yeah, so sorry, it just cut up a little bit at the end. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I just said
This
like
is the 2020 thing, isn't it? I don't think we can get through a video call without at least asking that once. So yeah, what I'm hearing, and again echoing my own experience, has been really understanding at least what those top level numbers look like. So okay, if we're going to sell this vision that we're going to get, yeah, just to pull some numbers out of nowhere, we're going to get to $10 million of revenue by year 3, then understanding, okay, then how many units of whatever we need to sell, whether it's wearable, software, whatever, to get there, and then having some sort of sensible thesis around, okay, if we need to make this many sales, then how does that happen? What does it look like from a cost perspective to get those sales? What does it look like from a traffic perspective to convert X number into Y sales, that kind of thing? And it does really surprise me sometimes when, as you say, a founder hasn't looked at that side, because you'd want to know for yourself. But to me, that's one of the lines of starting to create some reality around what you're doing, as opposed to the vision, because the vision's super important, but we need to be able to marry it to reality to get somebody to write a check.
100%.
Okay. I guess we may have covered some of this already, but before we jump into some questions, audience questions, is there any other advice you have at the moment for founders looking to raise capital, particularly, sort of given what's going on in the world and the fact that we're going to be living this, more this way than not for some months yet?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're looking at like TransTech companies, specifically, also like mental health investment has actually grown a lot as well. So, I mean, TransTech is still a small market and not I just think life is too short to do something you're not passionate about. And I just find that I have so much more energy to be working with something I really care about. And I've fundraised, both like supported fundraisers and fundraised myself previously. And it's just like a completely different confidence when you love the product and you know that the product is like helping already thousands of individuals and really has the potential to help millions. And I think that is really important. And then yeah, I mean, if it's really early stage, I think it's important to startup really isn't for everyone, and it's a responsibility taking other people's money, so I think it's just assessing how you want to spend it. You really want to spend your time doing this and spend other people's money. But otherwise, just like pandemic related times of uncertainty, have more buffer, and it's not very easy when you're a startup. You never have extra, you never have enough of anything, you never have enough time or money or resources or anything. But when you go into fundraise, to at least we actually in the pre-seed round overfunded a bit, which was great. So we did increase the round a bit after the circumstances. And I mean, we did the Indiegogo campaign as well. So we had the pre-seed, which was equity and then convertible notes, and then we did the rewards-based crowdfunding. So we did made sure that we sort of had a little bit more money. But there is, I think, not just founders, but also investors are really thinking about what they're doing and the impact they're having and so on. So there is more money going into things like TransTech and mental health tech and other more impact driven areas. Unfortunately, during funding and during the pandemic, investment in, for example, female founders went down to a 3-year low, and it's also
not go down anymore. It's crazy.
Yeah, so, and the same thing with minorities. So I guess there's at least a conversation, but funding hasn't really changed there. But it has to shift. So and yeah, and then the other thing is it's a matchmake. So you really want people to invest that care about what you do and that you can work with. And I had long conversations as well. One of our investors is on the board, and we spoke a lot about what kind of culture and how we want the board to work. And he's amazing. We start all our board meetings, by the way, with a meditation or a Sensate session. So
love it.
The board is needs to also be part of the culture and values of the company.
I have a quick question. You mentioned the crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo as well as the pre-seed raise. Both, and what would you say is different about the benefits of crowdfunding versus traditional VC?
So we did a rewards based. So it was tactical for us. It was tactical to use the platform for network effect. So this now I'm going into my sort of strategic tactical. So I was looking at, okay, well, we don't have a huge amount of traction or SEO to our existing website. So there is a network effect, and our product is actually reasonably well matched with Indiegogo. You can even test this out, like Facebook advertising and stuff. There's a lot of things you can do. And so for us, it was really sort of a commercial launchpad and reach an audience that was really interested in our product. So it was complementary. And obviously that is not, we also need to deliver devices. There are costs involved with that. But yeah, we didn't do equity on crowdfunding. In terms of benefits, there's a lot of people that are leaning that direction, and the control is you're not going to have people with a huge amount of control over the company. So if that's of interest, you can go with crowdfunding, and also there are certain businesses that work well on crowdfunding and that VCs kind of frown at, and I've had actually they're in the portfolio of one of our investors, and Rad Intelligence. They're a really awesome platform for influencer marketing. And he's just such a good entrepreneur and a great CEO and founder, and he's not having much traction with investors. And then he did a crowdfunding and just did phenomenally well. So I think it's also just like figuring out what's well suited. We did both, so yeah, it's great.
Yeah. I was so curious to hear your answer, because I work with Crowdcube, who are the UK's main equity crowdfunding platform. And the way I work with them is I basically help introduce companies to them, because they know that I talk to lots and lots of startups. And of course, I co-founded a crowdfunding platform as well in the real estate market, which has now gone past £100 million worth of lending. So, they're dominating that sector. And the biggest benefits of crowdfunding, in my opinion, and also Crowdcube's, is that it's really an audience activation strategy more than anything else. It will basically, whether you're doing equity or rewards, it's the same thing, which is you're raising the awareness of what you're doing, and you're creating a tribe of people who are, they're more likely to become your loyal fans and share about you and so on, because they're getting rewards out of you one way or the other. They're getting a better deal than is going to be the case when you might go to your full retail strategy or that sort of thing. And you're absolutely right, there's certain types of businesses that do better on crowdfunding than others. And I think with Sensei, you've got a really interesting one, because the way the product is and what it does and how it does it and who it does it for lends itself very well to crowdfunding and to VC investment. But it's a point that I don't think I could reiterate more, which is that actually it's a certain type of business that it's suited well to VC. And there's so many great viable businesses out there, some of which have gone on to become really big businesses that either weren't suitable for VC to start with, or never went there. And I think sometimes in the startup world, because we hear so much about the latest funding deal or whatever, it can look like everybody's doing that, but there's so many viable ways. So one of the great pieces of work in this space that I highly recommend, I think it was John Mullins who wrote it, but it's called the customer funded business. And that really goes through a number of different models where you can fund a business at least to a certain point, at least to a point of validation and traction, in ways that don't involve having to take a concept to angels or institutions. And I just think that that's a better way of doing things initially, much like what Stefan did with you guys initially. You know, let's produce a limited run of these devices and get it working, because then when you go to those institutional investors, it's not just a vision, but you've got something tangible to say, well, look, you know, we've proven that these 1,000 people wanted it, so therefore it's not a big stretch to say maybe 100,000 people want it, and that kind of thing. So I think that's quite important. If you, sorry,
yeah, I mean, it's really true, and it's almost like the VC world is almost like a celebrity world. So there are so many healthy businesses, but what VCs really look at very high multiples, right? So if you are thinking of growing a business into, I don't know, 200 million, it's not enough for a VC exit, right? So, but there are, I've raised money for other types of businesses. I've raised money for AIM-listed company, and there are, I think it's a really important point, Nerj, that there are loads of other institutions as well that aren't so hip and cool, that invest in just healthy, normal businesses.
Yeah, great point. So if you have a question, then raise your hand or put it in the chat box, and I'll either read it out or I'll turn on your microphone and you can ask it. Rick Leander has asked, he said, I think the product is very interesting. I will say, as somebody who's been lucky enough to try the product and have the product, it's very, very interesting. It really does what it says that it does. Is there a discount code we can use to encourage our chapter members to purchase and use? So yes, Sensate have very kindly provided a discount code for our community, so I'll be sharing that in the follow-up email. Yeah, so just if anyone has a question, raise your hand or chuck it into the chat box, and we'll spend a few minutes on questions.
I think there's one other point that I
please do,
with just kind of the current climate and, you know, just raising money during a pandemic and all that. I think it's also quite useful to recognize that it is a bit harder, because you need such a lot of resilience. You get so much rejection, and that is just what it is. I mean, I enjoy it at this stage because I like the process. I get to meet and talk to very smart people that challenge me and ask relevant questions and so on. So, you know, I don't take it personally, but it is a difficult climate, and you know, the mega deals. So there's a lot of money that is being deployed, and really big deals having like they're up a lot, but very early stage funding is down. And so it's also just to kind of understand that also generally during downturns so on, it is good to try to reach revenue earlier and to try to not need such enormous spend if you are in that kind of business. But yeah, I mean, there is a decrease in early stage funding.
Yeah, definitely. It's probably a different discussion for a different day, just because I'm aware of where we are from a time perspective. But now is definitely a time to think creatively about how that revenue can come, and it might be some sort of high ticket service that's associated with your product. It might be a way to create a corporate offering, because even before the pandemic hit, Nicole, Paula, and the team and I, and Ladena, my co-chair in Europe, we were working with a bunch of promising TransTech companies to try and accelerate their move into corporate, because we could, before the pandemic came, we knew that a correction had to come anyway, and it had to come in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And the antidote to that was to help people to get into corporate. But of course, that's not a straightforward thing always. There is, that can take a bit of time. What I have seen from a personal point of view is that, number one, companies are under more pressure to spend on employee well-being, which doesn't mean they're necessarily going to invest in technology or devices or that sort of thing. But what it does mean is that the mid-sized companies, not the big publicly listed corporations, but the mid-sized companies do have some spending power for, I'm not saying you guys would do this because you're at a different stage of growth now, but there would be scope for a Stefan or somebody else to do, for them to buy 20 Sensates and have a virtual session on how to get the best out of a Sensate that could be charged on top. And it's that kind of creativity that needs to happen now for earlier stage companies to really just get good bits of revenue in, which also serve as bits of validation and traction and so on. And I think, there's always been a reluctance from founders to do that kind of thing, because it's you're in the weeds, it's really gritty work, whereas you can feel like you're doing something valuable, taking a thesis to 25 different VCs, because they'll all give you a meeting, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily getting anywhere with it. So I just think that now is a time to really double down and look at stories of like the Airbnb founders who, when Airbnb was going nowhere, they made a cereal and sold it, and that, okay, it's not related to what they're doing, but it's that grittiness to figure out, based on today's world, what can we do that somebody needs that's going to help us move forward? So I think that's a good point. Another question that's come in. Okay. So is Anna available to contact, and how to find US angels that invest in UK companies from a funder who is American living, sorry, from a founder who is American living in London? So in terms of your contact details, I'll leave that up to you if that's something you want us to share. We can do that in a follow-up email, but any thoughts on how to find the US angels who would invest in UK companies?
Yeah, and actually ties a little bit back to your point as well, which I think is really important. You can spend such a lot of time, and people will take a meeting. And so I would pretty much in every meeting, they would say, oh, can I have a new device? I would like to try it, which makes sense if you're going to invest in the company that you want to try it. But I would then validate that they actually qualify to invest first, right?
Yeah.
And then, so it's a great opportunity to then like, okay, so just confirming that you do invest in UK companies, and would a ticket of a minimum of 25K be reasonable for you? And then it's just like, oh, well, actually, and then it's like, well, here's, you can buy one. So
yeah, for angels especially, because there's so many angels who are tire kickers now because of, unfortunately, because of Shark Tank and Dragon's Den and stuff like that. One of the questions that I love is, tell me about your last 2 investments. Just to tell me what they were, how they went, what the tickets are, and that really quickly, if somebody hasn't done 1 or 2 investments in the last 12 or 18 months, then they can't be considered a, sort of serious player. Any thoughts on how to find US angels that invest in UK companies?
Yeah, so how to find, it's great to start with, there are a number of angel networks in the US. Some of them are quite well known, so also depending on what area. There are some that invest more in academic, medical, those kind of things. But all of this you can do desktop research. I do quite a lot of research, trying to analyze and looking for what type of investments. Always with the groups, it's much easier because you could generally find information about what they invested in, which is harder for individuals. When it comes to individuals, it is kind of great to find one, and then they will introduce you to a second one, and then you kind of move your way. I have not found that platforms have been effective, but I'm not saying they're not. There are a number of new platforms that are also supposed to kind of help with due diligence and those kind of things. And I think that is really relevant. I think that the angel networks that are well organized are much more useful. But I believe in the idea of the platforms. I just haven't personally been successful with any of the angel platforms.
Fair enough. Okay, cool. So I am going to bring the meeting to a wrap. Before we do that, Anna, where can we find all the Sensei information and find you guys online?
Yeah, so our website is getsensate.com. So GETSENSATE.com. We're My Sensate on Facebook and Twitter, and on Instagram. We're also on Instagram, Sensate, and yeah, LinkedIn, we're by Self Technology. And I'm happy for you to share also some other contact details in the follow-up email. And yes, there will be a promotion, a promo code as well.
Amazing. So we'll share all of those links, and there will be a discount for attendees for Sensei. But just want to say, Anna, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know it's a crazy busy time for you. To everybody else, thank you for joining us as well. I know that these are exceptional times where we've got a million different things to do. I hope that was super useful. Please do feel free to follow up with me, and I will share all of the details for Sensate as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much.